and the bathrooms are down this hallway on the left. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Carrie Ann Kessler, who is the program director for the TRIPPS program, and she's going to put this evening into a little bit of context for all of us and introduce our guest speaker. So thank you all for coming.
So I'd like to thank Maria for doing an amazing job organizing this tonight. I had almost zero to do with it, so if you love it, it's all Maria. That's great. So it looks wonderful, and we have such a great crowd here. There's a lot of excitement and interest in this topic, not only MIT, but just the topic of innovations and technology and what's new and what's exciting in the field of aging and growing older in America. So we'd like to thank you for coming. A lot of exciting changes. We try to keep up with them here at TRIPPS. So at TRIPPS we do a million different things, but one of the things we try to do is keep up to date with everything that's new and changing. You might remember, for example, just as one example, the ITN, I think it's Independent Travel Network, folded a couple of years ago. That was a great option for a lot of seniors that's no longer available. We found out last week that Busy Bee medical transportation is no longer being offered in Massachusetts, so we try to keep up with that, spread information when things like that happen. But then we also have a lot of options opening up, like Uber and Lyft. I don't know if you know that tonight, this very night, they're having a public hearing. You might have read in the newspaper recently about the drivers and all that's been going on with the background checks with the drivers for those services. They're having a public hearing tonight on that very topic, and that's just one of the many innovations that's going on in this field. Not to mention self-driving cars, which is in the news every week now. Medical technology, advances in that, in-home technology, ways to make your cars and your homes safer as we grow older. So that's just one of the things that we do, is we try to keep up to date with these, and one of our volunteers, Shirley, is responsible for probably keeping us more up to date than anybody else. We're a volunteer-run organization, and our volunteers come from a rich diversity of backgrounds and experiences and skills. We have some folks who are real techies and real with technology, and then we have others who are great with people. We have people who know the T really well, they know the MBTA. We have people who are really excited about sharing Uber and Lyft with seniors. So we have whatever you need related to senior transportation, we have a volunteer who can help you with that. We have a public transportation, or not public transportation, we have a senior transportation resource and information guide. If you would like one of those, you can ask us on the way out. It's brand new, we have the second edition. It's been out only for 2 or 3 weeks now. It's almost 200 pages, so it's pretty comprehensive, and it's all the public transportation and non-driving options that you would have available to you here in Brookline, and a little bit of Newton as well where we work. So we can give you information, we can answer questions. On your program, you'll find our phone number, our email address, our website. You can always reach out to us and just say, you know, I wanted to go to the Revere Beach Sandcastle competition this year, and I don't want to drive because it was a nightmare. I drove last year, it was awful. Is there any way I can get there without driving? We can sit there right on the phone and tell you options for getting there. So if it's just a quick question, we can do that. Or if you say, I've heard about the Senior Charlie card, which is an amazing thing. For $30 a month, you can get unlimited access to the MBTA system. We can help you get a Senior Charlie card. One of our volunteers will actually get on the T with you and go with you to Downtown Crossing, help you apply for that card, come back here, and then if you're still not feeling confident, they will go on the T a couple more trips with you until you start saying, you know, I think I can do this on my own. Because learning anything new has a learning curve with it, and we're there to help you do that. Just like when you were learning to drive, you had a lot to learn. Now you're learning to kind of use other modes of transportation. We're here to help you with that. And we like to think of it as adult education, continuing education. It's a challenge, it's exciting, it's an adventure. So that's our approach. That's what we do here at TRIPPS, is we help you explore your many options, which we're really, really lucky to have here in Brookline. We have so many options, and sometimes it's easy to complain about your options, but we really are really lucky here relative to the rest of the country. So TRIPPS is here not only to keep you abreast of all this information, but to help you however we can. to introduce Lisa, Dr. D'Ambrosio, who is our guest speaker today. She's a research associate at MIT at the Age Lab. She's an instructor, a researcher, a widely published author. Her research focuses on questions around decisions that impact later life, like financial planning and preparedness, transportation, mobility, and technology. Before she came to MIT, she was a research analyst at the U.S. Department of Transportation, who funds the TRIPPS program, by the way, kind of through the Mass Department of Transportation. And we're really happy to have her here tonight, and we're really grateful that she's able to share her vast experience with us here at the Brookline Senior Centers. I will hand it over to Dr. D'Ambrosio.
So thank you all for coming tonight. As I was listening to Carrie Ann talk about people who have technology experience and those who have less experience, despite the fact that I come from MIT, I'm not an engineer. I was trained as a political scientist. So you'll see me at a couple of points during the presentation where I'm back to actually start the video because I haven't figured out how to embed the start button in here. So got the videos in there, didn't get them to start automatically. So thank you all for coming tonight and taking time out of a beautiful evening to come and spend some time here with the TRIPPS program. I'm going to talk a little bit about the MIT Age Lab and some of the research that we've done around keeping people mobile today and what we've learned about older drivers and their changes in their driving behaviors as they've grown older. Talk to you a little bit about some of the different tools that we've used at the lab, including our Agnes suit. And talk a little bit about some of the research we've done around older drivers and new and emerging mobility technologies. So when we think about aging at the lab, we think about aging as a success story. We are all living longer on average, and that's great. It means that we're doing something right. All of these advances in medicine, technology, public health, and education have combined to help us in the US and all over the world help people live longer than ever before. But that means that people are living longer than ever before. So historically, there's been no generation of younger adults or societies that have had to deal with such a large population of older adults. So while we are all living longer, and it's great, I don't think that any of us really wants to give up those extra years, it means that societally, institutionally, from an infrastructure perspective, we haven't really prepared for this large a population of older adults. So on the one hand, it's been a great success, but on the other hand, there's a challenge because we're not really prepared for this size population. And if you look at it, this is a pretty familiar chart, I'm sure to some of you. Sometimes it's called the pig and the python chart. These are population pyramids. And if you look all the way over on the left, that's what the age population distribution looked like in 1950. You see at the very bottom of the graph, these are young, people who are 0 to 4, 5 to 9, so forth, all the way up to the very top, ages 80 to 84, and 85 plus. I'm sorry, very top, 85 plus. So you see that in 1950 we had, a chunk of people down at the bottom, and then as people age, you saw fewer and fewer people at the top. Then you move over to 1970, you start to see the bars at the top get a little bit fatter. Let's see, where's the baby boom population? You can see they're right here. They're kind of this bulge that comes out here. By 1990, the boomers are the bulge here, but you see also at the very top of the chart, more older adults, more people living longer. To 2010, you start to see what we call the squaring of the population pyramid. Now you start to see that at the very bottom, instead of there being more younger adults, it's starting to look a little bit more like a rectangle. And as you go up, again, we see more older adults. Look at 2030 projections and 2050 projections. Look at the population of people ages 85 and plus, 85 and older. That's the fastest growing segment of the US population, people ages 85 and older. So we talk about this at our lab as disruptive demographics. It's an unprecedented demographic shift. People are living longer, they're healthier, on average they're wealthier, better educated. It's a different older adult population than in previous generations as well. It's more racially, ethnically, economically heterogeneous. And a lot of times, at least when we started the lab, when my boss started the lab, Joe Coughlin, when he we started the lab 18 years ago, people thought about aging as, oh my God, it's this problem. What are we going to do with this terrible problem of people living longer? Again, this is a success story. This is a positive thing. We really want to think about aging as what kinds of challenges and opportunities does aging offer us. But again, as I mentioned before, societally, we're kind of underprepared for this larger population of older adults. So I like to think about aging as it's easier to do in some ways. We have all kinds of medical advances, again, technology, public health advances, to help make it easier for us to live longer. But that brings with it its own set of challenges. It's more difficult in some ways. You have now a whole host of kinds of decisions that previous generations didn't necessarily have to prepare for. Are you going to have enough money? Are you going to outlive your money, or is your money going to outlive you? How are you going to make decisions about how you're going to allocate that money as you age? Where are you going to live as you grow older? Is it with family? We know we've had changing family structures and patterns as well with this aging demographic shift. So where are you going to live? How are you going to access transportation? How are you going to spend money? How are you going to save enough money? Again, all of these are kinds of questions that previous generations who maybe reached age 65, 67, 70, 72 didn't really live much past that, didn't have to deal with in the same way that now our generation's living 85 plus. So again, aging definitely has been made easier in some ways, but some of the challenges and the questions that we have to grapple with are more complex than previous generations have had to deal with. So these extra years that we get are called a longevity bonus. These years that we have now, thanks to, again, all of these advances. So we've been awarded this bonus. We like to think about how you're going to spend it, and we here at the Age Lab are there to help you do it. We are interested in what my boss likes to call this white space. We used to think, again, that as you got older, things should stop working. It's okay if you have pain. That's just the acceptable condition. You should just live with it, bear with it. You're not going to want to be doing much or getting out much. That's just what happens when you get older. But that's not the attitude. That's not the perspective that we have. That's not our expectations for what we have as we grow older. In fact, we have higher expectations for our quality of life, what we want to be doing with our time, how we want to be spending it. Do we want to be continuing to work? Do we want to be active in volunteer work? Spending time with family, traveling. How do you want to spend that time? And so we're interested in how do we help people stay up where their expectations are? How do we think about how different kinds of technologies and ways that people make decisions and choices can help us attain a high quality of life, not only for older adults, but also for people who care for them across the lifespan. Because one of the things we have learned in our 18 years at the Age Lab is that it's not just enough to study older adults. Partly we understand older adults by looking at younger adults. How are people changing developmentally over the lifespan? We might think about kids, and we think about kids and teenagers, and we think, okay, great, they finally hit now apparently 25, and their brains are developed, and that's it. But that's not it. We see different decisions. We see people reacting differently in their 20s, in their 40s, in their 60s. So there's a whole developmental process going on throughout the lifespan. So to understand what people are doing in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, in part requires that we develop an understanding of what they're doing at younger ages. And also, as I mentioned, some of those decisions that people are making at older age have the seeds planted when people are at a younger age. So how do we understand some of those decisions that people make? So as we've been thinking about older adults, we've also thought about how do those future older adults, today's younger adults, how are they living? What kinds of choices are they making? Are they really thinking about what it means to navigate a long life? So our research at the lab, as I mentioned, we span generations, and we also span a wide variety of topics. We're a very interdisciplinary group. As I mentioned, I'm a social scientist by training. I work with other social scientists, psychologists, I work with engineers, and we do a variety of different kinds of research from transportation, and here we talk about some of that tonight, to financial planning and preparedness, to trying to understand how people interact with new technologies, how they use those technologies affect the decisions they make and how they live their lives. And we've developed some different materials, for example, public education materials, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and some different tools for trying to understand human behavior and human actions better. So a couple of those tools are the Miss Daisy Driving Simulator, which is a full VW bug that has had the engine dropped out of it. She actually just had a major upgrade last year, so she has a motion base. So you get in the car and it will rock and move back and forth a little bit to give you that sensation of driving. There are 180 degrees of screens around you, so it's like being in a very large video game in some ways. But it's a car. It's got the seatbelt in the right place, the steering wheel in the right place, and we project essentially a driving image in front of you. We ask people to drive, and we ask them to drive under different kinds of conditions. So we might ask them to interact with the new technology that we put in the dashboard of that vehicle and see how it affects their driving behavior. Or we might ask them to do something like respond to a cell phone call and recollect some information like items from a grocery list, and then look at how that affects their driving. Those are some of the situations that we look at where we might not want to put people out on the real road, but if we put them in a driving simulator, it's much safer for everybody. Having said that, we do have a fleet of on-road vehicles as well that are equipped with sensors all around to videotape the driving environment, to capture the driver's eyes, to capture the driver's physiological activity. So we can tell when drivers are more or less stressed by different activities. So we capture a lot of information about humans' interactions with different technologies and under different kinds of driving conditions. We have our Agnes tool, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a moment. And we do a lot of surveys, interviews, focus groups to try to learn from people directly how they think about different kinds of questions and the kinds of decisions that they've made. And perception analyzer, which I will also talk about in a little bit. So as I mentioned, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Agnes, who is our Age Gain Now Empathy Systems suit. She is probably the most photographed image from the Age Lab. So we developed Agnes because, as we said, we know the population is aging, but who designs for this population? Oftentimes it's a lot of young people, young engineers. And young engineers, we know, often like to design things because they can. They design things because they're cool. They can make them work technologically. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're most functional for the population as a whole. So Agnes was a tool to help us understand, help people develop empathy for what it might be like to navigate the world as an older adult. So the suit mimics different kinds of anatomical and physiological changes that are typically associated with aging, so that people can really try to experience the world through the eyes and in the shoes of an older adult. We basically built Agnes a little bit kind of off the shelf, trying to think about what could we grab, what kinds of things could we put together to create Agnes. So there's a neck brace to reduce some cervical rotation, earplugs to limit hearing. There are elbow, wrist, and knee braces to reduce joint mobility and to increase stiffness. Gloves to reduce tactile sensation and reduce grip strength. We've also augmented the suit. We've added weights as well, so weighted gloves to try to mimic what some of the impact of having arthritis is. It's not exactly the same feel, but what it can generate is some of the same fatigue that might be associated with having arthritis and some of the kind of effort that's involved in manipulating and working with different kinds of products. There are shoes with foam on the bottom to try to mimic some of the challenges around balancing that many older adults have. And there are bands to reduce the range of motion. So what you don't see in this picture is underneath that suit, there's basically a climbing harness, a belt built around the wearer's core. So they're wearing this climbing harness, and these bands hook from that harness to the arm and to the back of the leg. So it reduces your range of motion in the arm, it reduces your stride length, and I don't think we mentioned it here, but there are also bands from this helmet that also connect to that harness. So it induces some sort of spinal compression. So it forces you to hunch over, it forces you to bend down a little bit. It's extremely fatiguing to wear Agnes. People like to try it, but they don't usually like to keep the suit on for too long. We did a little bit of study with what's the impact of wearing Agnes. So sometimes what I like to think about her is it's like you wake up one morning and everything's gone wrong all at once. What we do know is that as we age, as our bodies change, they change gradually, typically. So we make all kinds of small accommodations over time to make it easier to get around, easier to work in our environment. So as those changes accumulate, since we're living with them every day, we might not notice them. Somebody else coming in from the outside might look and say, you know, this is not how you should be setting up in your kitchen, or this bathroom setup doesn't work for you. I see that you've managed to, you know, use the stool from the garden and the hose, and you bring that up to make it safe for you, but there are other ways that we can set up this environment to make it work better. But we're used to making those small changes. Yeah? Sure, yeah. So I'll get to this in 1 second. So we talk about Agnes sometimes as it's like waking up with all of these bad conditions, all of these chronic conditions, all of these physical changes happening to you all at once. We know in real life, again, for many people, that's a much more gradual process. So this was a study we did with undergraduates at MIT, and we asked them to put on the Agnes suit. We asked them to perform a series of tasks while wearing the Agnes suit, like balancing on one leg with your eyes closed, stretching, and you know, how far can you, if you're sitting down, what kind of extension, what kind of flexibility do you have? How long does it take you to walk a certain distance? So we asked them to do it once with the suit and once without the suit. And so these different bars are, the dark is where you see a decline or a decrease in task performance when they wore the Agnes suit. This very light color is for no change in performance. And then for some people, there was actually a slight improvement, a very small number of people. They actually improved better with the suit. We're not exactly sure why that is. On the whole, the suit did what we expected it to do. One of the things that's a little bit hard, if I could just finish this. One of the things that's a little bit hard is with younger adults, they've got a fair amount of muscle strength. So some of them might see the suit as this is an opportunity to just kind of work against it. As I said, it still adds to the fatigue, but it's not quite the same experience of not being able to have a certain range of motion at all. Yeah?
I don't see a legend indicating what the numbers above the bars are. Could you point it out if I'm missing it, or tell us what it is?
These are the number of participants who were in each of those categories. So this was a small study with just about 23 people.
A percent of subjects is indicated in the y-axis. So you have double representation of the number of subjects?
We do. We have a count and we have a percent. It's a relatively small sample, so if you don't like the percentage to use as a basis, then you can use the count. Other questions? We've taken Agnes out on the road as well. We've done a little bit of grocery shopping with her at a local Star Market in Cambridge. And so some of these were, again, our researchers and some undergraduates who we had take part in this task. We asked them to look for a particular set of items, and so things that we saw, you know, I couldn't find the item I was looking for. It took me longer than I expected it to. Reading labels was hard. And one of the things that's kind of interesting was I didn't count my change in the checkout line. When I was checking out, I felt so pressured about the amount of time I was taking because there was somebody waiting behind me. I just wanted to get items into the cart quickly and finish the checkout experience. So that kind of sense of pressure or stress from what other people might be thinking or their expectations is something that was apparent to even our younger users wearing the Agnes suit. And we've also taken Agnes into the retail pharmacy chain. So this is a video I've got. I want to play a piece of it for you.
Life expectancy has almost doubled in the last 100 years. But the Age Lab wants to invent, what are we going to do with those extra 30, 40, maybe for even some lucky folks, 50 years? Agnes, Age, Gain, Now Empathy System, is a suit that tries to model or at least simulate what it might be like to be in your late 70s and have at least 1, 2, or 3 chronic conditions. The value of a company like CVS to use Agnes is not to replace other research methods, but to give the folks who design the stores, who are in charge of product packaging in terms of layout, the aha moment of what it feels like to actually have to pick a product, open the product, read a list, or consult at the pharmacy desk.
I walked in constricted to look down, and I really did not want to look up. So when I walked in and I saw the drive aisle, that immediately helped me navigate.
I found that while I had restriction on range of motion, it was never so much that I couldn't reach something at the top of the aisle. So I think our low shelves helped quite a bit. And then I found the range of service and the willingness of the pharmacy team to be helpful about front store items, incredibly important.
Overall, the pharmacy team was really nice and really helpful and patient with me.
It makes me think, you know, for our senior customers, this is their way of life. So it really elevates the obligation that we have to get this right.
Innovation is not about the technology, it's not about the product. It's how focused you can be on exciting and delighting the customer. And I think CVS's focus on being consumer-centered is a drive towards innovation and retail that will do well for them in the next 20, 30 years as the age of the population only increases.
And so some of those people you saw were actually not our researchers, but they were CVS executives who had the opportunity to put the Agnes suit on, and we gave them a shopping list and we told them to go shopping. And for some of them, it was really eye-opening to have, to be able to not find something in the store, to be able to have a lot of pain to bend down and find something, or to just want to rip off the goggles in order to find a particular vitamin supplement that you were looking for. So, this was, I think, one of our really great way to use Agnes to think about how are people navigating these spaces, what kinds of challenges do they have. And based on this study that we did with CVS, they just redesigned, incorporated different kinds of design aspects into the store. So if this works, no, apparently. I thought I'd put it back on slideshow, but not. Back. Sorry. Right, now that it'll probably start playing. Right. Okay. So some of the takeaways that we had from this were that Agnes really needed wider aisles. We talked a little bit about the pressure that people felt in the grocery store when they were checking out. People in the Agnes suit felt a lot of stress when they would look down an aisle and they would see a support pole standing in the middle of it, reducing the width of the aisle. And they think they've got to navigate that with a cart and the suit. The concerns about hitting other customers, backing up, really moving in the space was a challenge. One of our most fit 20-something undergrads backed into a display of gift cards at the end of the aisle because she just wasn't used to navigating in that kind of space. She thought she had enough room and she didn't. So that was a real eye-opener for us as well as for the people from CVS. Difficulty in reading ceiling signs, so things that were really high or colors between signs that weren't enough contrast really presented challenges. So things that were hanging from the ceiling were problematic. Some of the lollipop signs kind of blended in with the products, but some of the big wall signs were much easier to read. So when you see personal products painted on the wall or toiletries, you know where you're going. You can see that pretty easily. So we're still using Agnes. We were using Agnes actually. We use her with certainly some of our sponsors who are interested in how do consumers interact with products. A lot of undergraduates actually like to use the Agnes suit when they're thinking about, we have obviously one of the great things about MIT is there are all these smart kids running around. So people who are designing the next generation walker, or they're interested in designing a new technology, they can come in and use Agnes to see what's it like if I'm wearing the Agnes suit to interact with this product I've designed. We are also planning to use Agnes this summer with the MBTA to learn a little bit more about design and space in some of the MBTA stations. And we talk about Agnes really as Agnes incorporates that friction, frustration, and fatigue that often accompany older age, so some of the challenges in terms of getting around. So how can we think about optimizing spaces, places, technologies, to make them more usable for all users? Talk a little bit about transportation and focus a little bit on some of the research we've done with older drivers and older drivers, basically. So what we know from our research and from a whole body of other work is that driving is more than just a car. That it's not just about having the car to go from places A to B, but it's also about independence. It's about autonomy. And so what older adults have told us, a couple of quotes that are memorable: if it came to eating soup every day to keep my car, or steak every day to give up the car, I would eat soup. And then my personal favorite from a local Boston man: you can always get another wife, but you can only get one driver's license. He helps to put that driver's license in context for many, many people. But the question perennially is, when should people stop driving? Should people stop driving? Is there an age at which people should stop driving? Should we be testing people? And the research is complicated. The answer to that question is complicated. So we've done some research on some of the changes that older drivers have made to their own driving behavior as they age. We call this self-regulation. So people cut back on driving at night, driving in heavy traffic, driving on highways. They cut back on making left-hand turns. So they make all these kinds of small adjustments in order to continue to drive safely. We call that self-regulation. So we did a study about 10 years ago, that's longer now, 15 years ago at the Hartford, looking at evidence of driving self-regulation with age. And what we found is that 2/3 of drivers ages 50 and older were engaging in some kind of self-regulation. They were voluntarily cutting back on when and where they drove in order to stay safe. And we saw a big uptick in that self-regulation starts around age 75. And the Hartford actually just recently repeated this, and we see sort of this, we basically see the same kind of results, that people are engaging in self-regulation. So what we see is a lot of older adults are making pretty good decisions, and pretty smart decisions for them about their driving in order to stay safe. They're not putting themselves in risky conditions. They're trying to avoid those kinds of situations. We also looked at how people's self-regulation behavior varied not just with age, but with health. And one of my colleagues likes to say, it's not really, unsafe driving as people age is not really about age. Age is just a number. What really matters is your health status. And what we see is, if you look at these data, first of all, higher scores indicate more self-regulation. You see that women cut back more on their driving compared to men. I know that's shocking to all of you, right? If I asked you to guess that, you probably would have guessed that. So women tend to cut back more on their driving. They tend to stop driving earlier than men do on average. But what we see is that within every health condition, as people get older, they self-regulate more. So for people who are in poor health, these are men who are 50 to 55, as they go in 5-year age increments. From 50 to 85 plus, they self-regulate more. And as their health gets better, they self-regulate less. So the person who's 50 and in excellent health has much less self-regulation. But look at the person who's 50 in really poor health. That man is self-regulating about the same as a man who's about age 85. And you see a similar pattern for women. So what we see is a really significant impact of health within people's self-regulation behavior. It's not just age, it's both age and health. You do see these patterns that as people age, no matter what their health condition is, they do self-regulate more, but you do see this strong effect of health on people's self-regulation behavior. So it's one of the reasons why in some of our work we really focused on why health and physical fitness is so important in order to think about trying to maintain your driving skills as you age. So, as I mentioned, most older drivers self-regulate with age, but it doesn't always work. It's not a fail-safe solution. Not everybody necessarily makes smart choices or safe choices about cutting back on driving. A lot of times for people who are in those situations, there aren't necessarily great solutions. So sometimes doctors might get involved. The state, I just renewed my driver's license last week, and it was the same, go in, look at the eye test, great, the most of your time is spent waiting to get up to the counter, but you're there 3 minutes and they're not checking to see whether you're safe to continue to drive as long as you can pass the eye test. So states don't really have requirements. I think New Hampshire and Illinois are the only two states that have any sort of further testing requirement for older drivers. And I think that doesn't kick in until around age 80. So states aren't regulating that. So oftentimes it falls to families to determine whether someone is safe to drive. And that can be a really challenging situation for families, because how many of you are drivers or ever drove? Let me ask you that at first. Okay, so most of you, not all of you. How many of you, while you were drivers, kept thinking, I can't wait until I don't have to drive ever again. I can't wait to give up the keys. Okay, so one person, maybe two, so a couple people. A lot of you may have the reaction to one of my neighbors when I told her what kind of work I did. She turned to her son and she said, David, you're going to be taking these car keys from my cold, dead hand. So many of you may have more that kind of reaction to how you think about stopping driving. You don't plan to, it's convenient, it's what you want to be doing. So if you're in that situation and someone's not safe to drive, it's really caregivers who are then in the position of having to determine whether someone is safe to drive or not. So we know these conversations. Sorry, you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering to what extent the new sensors and technology in cars, such as lane variance and stopping for cars in front, and automatic radar-based cruise control, and a whole host of things, side warnings about other cars approaching their blind spot. How much that affects the ability of an older person who's sort of competent, but could occasionally make a mistake, to allow them to stay on the road.
Can I answer that question in a minute? Because I've got a study actually specifically looking at those kinds of technologies that I want to talk about. So when we think about caregivers though, we know it's a really stressful topic. We know it's a stressful situation. And so, and also for people who have a loved one who has Alzheimer's disease or dementia, that person might be safe to drive for a certain period of time, but at some point they will no longer be safe to drive. So how do you help transition that person from driver to passenger? So based on conversations that we did with older drivers and their adult children and older spouses who are also drivers, we developed some educational materials with the Hartford. So At the Crossroads is designed for caregivers and family members of someone with Alzheimer's disease or dementia, talking about how do you help transition that person to make that transition as safe and hopefully with as little stress to all involved as possible. And then we need to talk. How do you plan for conversations more effectively with older drivers who may not be safe to drive? And what we encourage people to do in all cases is to plan, think ahead to these kinds of situations. Encourage even, older drivers yourselves, you may want to look at some of these guides. So for example, we need to talk, there's a checklist of different driving behaviors. So we all make driving mistakes. If there's somebody here who has never rolled through a stop sign, more power to you. But we all make driving errors. We signal one way and then we actually go the other. We're also in Boston, right? So, but if you look for patterns of behavior, so using this checklist to think about what are some of the more dangerous driving behaviors, what are some of the patterns that we want to be attentive to determine perhaps if are you still at the peak of your driving performance? Do you want to think about cutting back yourself, or is somebody that you know or you care about perhaps no longer safe to drive? And we heard about, for example, some of the great resources you can access here in Brookline in terms of finding transportation alternatives. There are also tests, Buck Israel Deaconess runs, I think it's called DriveWise. They have a program where they do objective driver testing on a variety of different levels, from cognitive, perceptual, physical. They'll often do an on-road test as well as a simulator test so that they can really assess the whole driver. So there are different kinds of resources that you can use and families can access in terms of making decisions about driving. But one of the keys is, how do we help support older adults who are, in general, making good decisions about driving, and then how do we support families in helping older adults make those good decisions? So these resources are available free online, and I can send them after the talk to Maria and Carrie, if that makes sense. So I mentioned that exercise is a big piece of some of what we know about driving, and we did a study a couple of years ago. We were interested in whether any physical fitness could have an impact on safe driving behavior. We wanted to do something that was not expensive, that didn't require people to go to the gym every day or join a gym. It's something that they could do at home. So we used a WeFit system, and we developed a little exercise program that took about 15 minutes a day, and we asked people, a small set of people, I think we had about 35 people, participate in the exercises over a period of 8 to 10 weeks. And we were focused on flexibility, range of motion, strength, and coordination as our set of exercises.
At the Hartford, we're interested in helping you stay safe on the road for your lifetime. The Hartford Center for Mature Market Excellence conducts research to make sure that you have the latest, most credible information to help you and your family stay safe. We know that there's a connection between exercise and driving. That's why we're bringing you this video with simple exercises that can enhance your flexibility. Flexibility is important for movements like getting in and out of your car easily. The exercises you'll see here are based on research that we conducted in partnership with the MIT Age Lab. Our research found that exercise can help with turning your head and body to back up, to see blind spots, rotating your head in order to scan the driving environment, and getting in and out of the car.
Upper body flexibility is really important to driving skills. The chest and shoulder expansion is our first flexibility exercise. So lean forward in your chair. Your hands are placed on the back of the chair frame. Lift your chest. Inhale and exhale to lean forward, keeping your head and neck in line with your spine. Exhale. Good, again. And exhale. You lean forward at your hips. Again. And exhale. You should feel the stretch through your chest and your shoulders. About one more time. And back to center. The shoulder stretch is a great stretch for the shoulder and your back muscles. So if you will put your right arm across your chest, hold gently with your fingers without forcing or pulling, just feel the stretch through your right shoulder. Breathe evenly and continuously, hold for about 3 to 5 seconds. Come back to center and switch so we can do our left. Hold gently. Pull without forcing. Come back to center. Switch to the right again. You may do these exercises for each shoulder several times. And come back to center. Switch to the left.
Visit thehartford.com/lifetime for additional information on how to stay safe on the road.
Example of some of the exercises that we ask people to do. I've got a microphone. We also, as I mentioned, and as Jody mentioned in the video, we talked about range of motion, strength, coordination. There are videos for each of these. They don't require any real equipment. I think for biceps curls, they actually use a band. But if you have light weights or a can of something that you could grasp, you could use that. But just chair stretches to stretch your back, your heels, biceps, squats, soccer kicks, lateral steps, all designed to be done by older adults. You can do them safely. Most of these can be modified to either be done in a chair or using a chair as a source of support. And there are video links for each of these, just like the flexibility ones, where the trainer goes through the exercises. And as mentioned in the video, we didn't find a huge impact that all of a sudden, people used to drive 30 miles per hour now drove 50 miles per hour or anything like that, but we found some subtle changes in terms of people who had participated in the exercise program were more easily able to get in and out of the car. They could scan the environment more comfortably. They felt more comfortable checking blind spots when they drove. So those kinds of flexibility impacts, while they're not huge, those are the kinds of things that can contribute to driving safety. And again, this is a very small scale study done over a very short period of time. We're actually about to embark on another study with a different sponsor where we're looking at what's the longer term impact of exercise and physical behavior for people ages 65 and older, including what's the impact on different kinds of driving and driving safety. And I think with that, we have a much larger sample in mind, and I suspect that we will be able to find, again, some of those same impacts of physical fitness, positive impacts on driving behavior, comfort, and confidence behind the wheel. So this gentleman asked earlier, well, what about all of these new technologies that are coming to the market? We have adaptive cruise control, we have blind spot warning, we have cross-back traffic, we have rear backup cameras. Can technology be a solution to driving longer? And it's certainly a strong possibility, right? In the past 28 years, we've seen this tremendous migration and wave of new technologies coming to the car. We think about older drivers as the population in some ways most poised to take advantage of these new technologies. They can really potentially benefit from them the most. They do offer the promise of extending some safe driving years for older adults. They also offer the prospect of increased safety. When we look at the cause of crashes, most crashes are caused by human error. So when we think about increasingly autonomous vehicles, increasing safety technologies, these technologies are really in the process of removing the driver further from decision making, hopefully reducing error and kind of putting us on the path to the fully autonomous vehicle. But technology adoption is not a given, right? So new technologies are coming to the cars, but not everybody is immediately going to rush out and adopt them. One of my colleagues, Dr. Chai-Wu Lee, has studied the question around technology adoption extensively. And so there are different factors that affect whether people are going to adopt technologies. So one question is the technology itself work? Is it something that people can use? So BMW years ago developed something called the iDrive. And it's famous because it was so bad in its first incarnation. It was an example of one of those things that engineers developed this because they thought it was cool and they could. But the problem was the people who were buying these cars couldn't figure out how to use it. It was basically a little knob that you could turn and push to navigate through all of the different menus and options that you would have had on a dashboard. So rather than having displays and dials, all those different things, they were going to clean it up. Just give you one display and one little knob. It was going to be beautiful. And it would be if you could figure out, okay, I'm trying to change the radio, but I just keep turning the heat on. So those kinds of, it was a real problem and it was a failure. So one of the first projects that we did in our lab was to do some evaluation with the iDrive, and BMW subsequently integrated some things like, how do you get back to the home menu really quickly? Is there something you can press so that, I don't know where I am, but let me get back to the start point and I can start anew. So those are questions around usability. And obviously, companies are getting much better at that. They're starting to think much more broadly about who are the consumers, but still, companies don't always test as extensively as they might. Sometimes companies fall in love with certain kinds of technologies or certain kinds of ways of doing things, so they don't maybe make it as user-friendly as they might be able to. So there are always still questions around usability. What's easy to use? What's intuitive to use? Does it work like it's supposed to? So it's a beautiful technology. If it works 2 times, but it fails on the 3rd time, you're probably not going to buy it again. So there's does the technology work? Can you use it? Can you figure out how to use it? There's the delivery rate related section. Is there technical support if you don't know how to use it? Can you access it? Can you afford it? So one of the things that I think is really interesting, I don't know if you've seen car ads, but Toyota is really pushing that they're going to integrate all of these safety technologies into their vehicles. They're there automatically. But if you go to Honda, you're going to have to pay extra for every one of them. You're going to have to pay extra for these packages. So Toyota is, one of the things that they're trying to do is distinguish themselves on this dimension. I don't know actually whether if you worked out the cost for adding those items in, if your Toyota would be any different than your Honda. But when you think about accessibility, you think about affordability, those are things that we know that those are huge barriers for people. And we see companies obviously trying to grapple with this. And it's interesting too, we've seen this mass migration of technologies. Often they start at the luxury model. New vehicle technologies have disseminated incredibly rapidly down to base models now. So, base model Ford is going to have some of the same technologies that your high-end Lexus will. We also think about social contextual. Is the technology going to do something that is stigmatizing? Does it mark you as somebody who is in need of assistance or support or help? Or is the technology something that helps support your independence, make it easier for you to do what you want to do? Do you like it? Does it make you feel good to use it? Again, we think about the personal emergency response systems, the help I've fallen and I can't get up. People don't like wearing hunks of plastic around their neck that signal that they're in need of assistance. Or maybe something integrated into a Fitbit that looks like something else or that performs multiple functions. Those are the kinds of things that are going to be more successful. And then finally, for the individual, does it give them more confidence? Do they feel like it's compatible with their lifestyle? Does it fit in with how they live, what they do, and their own experiences with technology? So all of these factors are going to have an impact on whether people are going to be able to accept and learn how to use those new technologies, because that's one of the other things. How many years have you been driving? A lot, right? Most of you probably a lot. 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years. It's probably pretty ingrained. You probably don't think a lot of detail and very carefully about what you're doing in every single moment. Some of you might be if you feel like your driving skills are changing or your physical fitness and abilities are changing, you might be more attentive to that. But I look at sadly, my now 18-year-old who still doesn't have his license, and I get behind the wheel, or he gets behind the wheel, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and I see there's so much work involved. He's really thinking, what does this do? Oh my gosh, I just turned the windshield wipers on, I meant to signal. So all those things are really automatic to many of us. But with a lot of these new technologies, it may mean that we're going to have to relearn and rethink how we interact with the vehicle and how we drive. So that's one of the challenges for some of these new technologies, is we may need to really relearn how we drive. So we were interested in whether older adults wanted these technologies. And so we did a study with people 50 and older, and we asked them, we're going to show you a video. We're going to show you a video with some different technologies. We're going to describe what they are so you can see them. And we're going to give you a little handheld device. And you're going to tell us how interested you are in having that technology by turning the knob. So I don't know if you've ever seen presidential debates where they have the people say, oh, I really like that comment, I really don't like this. This is that same technology that we had with people. And so we had them see a video about reverse backup cameras, blind spot warning systems, lane departure warning systems, parking assistance, crash mitigation systems, smart headlight, and automatic or adaptive cruise control. And in this particular study, we were interested in what's the effect of different people telling you about these technologies? Does it have an impact on your willingness to adopt these technologies if the person is a car salesman, if it's a friend of a friend, if it's an engineering professor, who do you trust? It turns out for this particular study, it apparently didn't make much difference because nobody really paid attention to the introduction So it's one of those things we put up to learning experience and improve in the next study. So I don't think I'm gonna get this to work unless I go click on it either, so. Right now, I'll show you a little bit of this video.
Hi, it's Dave here, your go-to tech expert. Welcome to my video series on vehicle technologies. Let me walk you through a few of the latest features you may find on today's new cars. If you haven't been shopping for a car recently, expect to be surprised. Cars today are loaded with high-tech features and options. Some of the more common ones improve driver convenience and safety, and those are important to keep in mind if you're thinking of buying or leasing a new vehicle.
So what you're seeing here is the overlay. So these
Some of
are
the new technologies
average scores that
features
people
that have been
gauge
around for a
technology.
while. We've gotten used to having headlights that automatically switch from low to high beams for the best possible lighting and to assure that you don't blind oncoming drivers. Some cars now have adaptive headlights that swivel to point in the direction of the turn to illuminate the area you're moving toward. One of the most commonly available technologies is a backup camera. The simplest kind allows the driver to look at a video screen in the dashboard or rear view mirror that shows an image of what is immediately behind the car as it is put into reverse and is backing up. The display lets you see how close you are to something, such as a car and the space behind you. More importantly, it can show you if there is a child or a pet behind you. Some backup camera systems are even more sophisticated and will sound an alarm if there is an object immediately behind you. And some may even automatically stop the car if something suddenly comes behind the car while it's backing up. To avoid parallel parking, parking assistance systems can help do the job for you by pushing a button to let the car know you want to find a space to parallel park. As you drive, sensors scan beside your car to identify an opening large enough for parking. A beep will tell you to stop just beyond the open space. Then, automatically, the steering wheel will move the car into that space. The car will tell you when to shift gears and brake. It continuously checks to see if there's a problem or if you're too close to another car or another obstacle.
So that gives you a flavor for Microsoft's PowerPoint stuff for here, so I'm just going to talk for a minute. That gives you a flavor for some of the video. That was basically about a 7-minute video where people went through, this actor, not a real good tech expert, talked about the different technologies and described them, and we had some illustrations for, just say cancel, will that work? Okay, great. That was the last video anyway. So we had the description there, so people saw that video, then we actually had them watch a video about autonomous vehicles. I'm not going to talk about it, I'm going to talk about a different study on autonomous vehicles, but it's a quick recap of my presentation to date. Okay, so we looked at reactions that people had by gender and overall, and you see there were not a lot of differences by gender. We did see a little bit of difference on the technology you just heard about, the parking assist. Women were more favorable toward parking assist than men were. That was one of the few places where we saw a difference by gender in terms of interest in the technologies. But generally, as you see, people are pretty consistent with each other, not a lot of differences. We asked people what did they like the most. Far and away, reverse backup cameras were people's favorite technologies. And that's great because as of 2017, they are standard on all new vehicles. So those are mandated. Blind spot warning systems were next most favored. People really were concerned about checking their blind spots. other people riding in their blind spots, and changes in kind of norms for driving behavior compared with when they learned how to drive. So blind spot warning systems were number 2. Collision avoidance systems, so systems where the vehicle senses that there's an object in front of you or you're coming up too quickly on something, the car will warn you. It may, in some systems, the car will start to slow itself down. The car will, again, some systems, it'll tighten the seatbelt. It'll brake automatically, so it'll do things to kind of keep you safe, like, for example, holding you in place with the seatbelt, and it will bring the car to a halt. So those kinds of systems were also popular, followed by smart headlights, adaptive cruise control, which will maintain a safe distance from vehicles in front of you. You don't, especially for highway driving, you don't really need to monitor your speed. Less popular were lane departure warning systems and parking assistance. Parking assistance is actually the least popular technology, according to our overall sample. And part of it was what people thought the technology was going to do for them. So when they thought it was going to improve their driving safety, which is this blue bar on the left, sort of a medium shade of blue, those were the technologies people liked. Technologies that they thought were going to help them be safer drivers. Technologies that tended to be more for convenience or comfort were kind of less favored. So for example, parking assistance, people said that their biggest thing that they thought about that technology is it makes people too reliant on the technology. Parallel parking assistance, a use it or lose it skill. If you don't use it, you're going to get too dependent on the technology, you won't know how to do it otherwise. And we had people say that in our groups as well. And we also had people who said, I can't wait to get this technology. I never want to parallel park again if I don't have to. So those kinds of, but those are the kinds of reasons why things like parking assistance were kind of less favored. People saw it as the technology is usurping your skills as opposed to supplementing your skills and helping you. And I mentioned, obviously, autonomous cars are kind of the next frontier in transportation. And a colleague that I've been working with for about 15 years used to say, oh, those autonomous cars are never going to get here. And about 5 years ago, he was saying, oh, maybe in 2030, and now he's saying in about 2 years. So, the speed at which this technology has been developing and when it's been moving to market has been tremendous. And we did a survey last fall of drivers of all generations, and we were interested in what they knew and what they thought about autonomous vehicles. And we had people born basically before 1945, silent generation, older and younger boomers, Gen X, and then older and younger millennials. And what we basically found is that the younger you were, the more you claimed to know about or to know more about autonomous vehicle technologies. And the more male you were, the more you claimed to know about autonomous vehicle technologies. We were interested in, do people think, under what kinds of conditions do they think that these kinds of vehicles are going to be able to work reliably? So we asked them, what about on old streets in need of repair? We found that younger generations were more likely to trust that these vehicles would work than older generations. Reliably, generally, is the technology going to work? Is the car going to do what it's supposed to do? Again, younger generations more likely to trust that it would work. And in poor weather, younger generations more likely to trust than older generations. So by younger generations, in this case, I'm talking Gen X and the millennials. So baby boomers and silent generation are in general less likely to trust that these vehicles and this technology are going to work under this variety of different conditions. We ask what people like, and again, you see that same sort of impact on safety. People are interested in technologies that help keep them safe. So if the technology is going to do its job and keep the driver safe, be a safer driving experience, those are the kinds of things that are attractive to people. People, the ability to do other things while driving, also kind of interesting for people, more convenient. But again, like impact on mobility, not as favorable for the population as a whole. But again, safety really stands out as the feature that most people like about these kinds of vehicles. And we asked them, when would you use this? So we saw that people would, a majority of people said they would use autonomous vehicles if they were driving a long distance. So you're driving 3 or 4 hours, put on the autonomous vehicle, just relax, kick back, watch a movie, it's all good. If you're physically incapable of driving, so if you physically couldn't drive, people were more likely to say, yes, I would use this vehicle. Or if you were really tired, fatigue. So those are conditions under which a majority of people say, I would use this. Likely, again, not a majority of people saying it, and we see many more people saying no. These are the red bars here. On a familiar road, I'm thinking a commute. I don't know why people are using it, but interesting. Mentally incapable. So if I'm physically incapable of driving, I'm definitely using the car. If I'm mentally incapable, I don't know if I would use the car. Uncomfortable driving generally. Again, a fair number of people saying no, I wouldn't use the autonomous vehicle. And then, surprisingly, if I'd been drinking, still a high percentage of people saying no, I wouldn't use the car under that situation. Which was, again, we think of this as, this is a case where autonomous vehicles, again, removing human error from crashes, human judgment, the autonomous vehicle can really contribute here. Probably not using it for going to work, which again, shocking to us because so much of what we see about autonomous vehicles is you'll be able to use this for your commute, and all of your time that you're spending commuting now, all that time is going to come back to you and you're going to use it. So people said, I'm not going to use it to go to work. I wouldn't use it in heavy traffic. And if I were in an unfamiliar area, I don't want to use the autonomous car. So some little surprises for us in some of the conditions under which people were less likely to use the car. Oh, apparently the title didn't change over here. Actually, there it is. We asked people, would you be willing to let a child at different ages use the car by themselves? And pretty much no one is willing to let a child from 0 to 5 use the car by themselves. Or a few more people are willing to let the child 5 to 12 use the car by him or herself. And then we see, maybe about 1 in 5 willing to let a teenager through 13 to 17 get in the car by him or herself without an adult present. And again, this is one of the things that's touted about some of these vehicles. It's like, oh, you don't need to pick up the kid from soccer practice, just send the car. The car will pick them up, the car will get them where they need to go. People aren't quite ready to trust the technology yet to do that. And in some ways, we look at this as kind of a litmus test. If you trust the car to do these kinds of things, then it's kind of a game changer. Again, do you trust the car with somebody who has dementia or a cognitive impairment? Will they be able? Is this going to solve all of the problems for transportation? No, it's not. It might help for some of those situations if you've got sort of somebody on one end and somebody on the other end. But again, it's not necessarily a cure for everything. So there are some new models we're getting around. Again, Uber and Lyft were mentioned at the beginning, and in our lifestyle leaders group, of which Rita is a part, one of the topics that we had with this discussion was, would you use services like this? Have you used services like this? And increasingly, as people who are 50, 60, 65, 75, 85, and older have and use smartphones, access to these kinds of services will be improved and increased. And some of what we're seeing are some interesting new ways in which these services are being leveraged. So for example, I was reading the other day about a small town in Canada that wanted to add public transit. So they've hired and contracted with Lyft, I think Uber actually, to provide that service. So thinking about how do these services, how can we leverage these kinds of services to develop new kinds of partnerships, new kinds of business models for how we can provide transportation. A lot of the kinds of networks that we tried to spring up organically, like ITN, haven't necessarily been successful in substituting for people's driving themselves. So will these kinds of models be more comfortable, be more familiar? Will they kind of achieve that status of being not stigmatizing, convenient, affordable, and easy to use? So that is all I've got. I encourage you to go to our website at agelab.mit.edu. If you're interested in volunteering for our studies, there's a place there where you can sign up, and if we have studies that are of interest to you, we'll send you a note, and if you want to participate, that's great. If you don't want to, no problem. And we also have our Lifestyle Leaders Group. That is composed of people who are ages 85 and older. They come to the Age Lab every other month, and we focus on a particular topic of interest, and there's usually some sort of presentation and discussion, and we usually put together a short paper each meeting. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
So if you have questions, I'll bring the microphone to you and then bring it back to Lisa to answer your question.
Yes, you mentioned that one of your colleagues most recently predicted 2 years to autonomous vehicles. Is that the consensus, or what is the range, and as well as your opinion, as to when we'll have seemingly reliable autonomous vehicles? The second part of my question is it expected that manufacturers are going to take full control away from the driver or have a more interactive capability?
So I think there are actually two questions to the autonomous vehicle piece. One is the technology piece, and one is the everything else piece. So the technology piece is relatively close to being ready for prime time. There are conditions in which it's problematic. So there are certain kinds of weather conditions and road conditions that the technology is less reliable in, but I think manufacturers are aware of some of those. I think they're working very hard to overcome them or to put other kinds of redundant systems in place so that the capability will still work. The other piece is the social, political liability side of it. So, and that goes in part to some of your second question. Are manufacturers really going to remove the driver completely from the equation? So the technology is all headed in that direction, that the driver really doesn't have to do anything.
Doesn't have to, or isn't allowed to?
Doesn't have to. Doesn't have to.
So what about being allowed to?
So that's one question. Is there's a huge issue here around liability, because we can't rule out that there won't still be crashes. So does the driver need to ultimately have some control or be able to take some control of the vehicle? Will manufacturers always allow for that possibility because they don't want to face liability concerns? So partly I think that question is, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think partly it's tied up with questions about liability and responsibility and what kinds of regulations and policies we're going to develop around those kinds of vehicles on the road.
So how many years do you think they'll actually be sold to the general populace, or range?
So I think that I think probably within 10 years. Yeah, I don't know, again, I don't think that all those pieces are going to be worked out. I suspect that those cars in 10 years are still going to have the capability for drivers to take over, especially because I think those will be kind of on the leading edge. I think you look at what Tesla's already done with its vehicles on the road, and the technology is forms, but obviously there have been some really obvious glaring disastrous errors with technology as well. So, right.
Why is there an assumption that autonomous vehicles are any more safer than human driving?
So he asked why the assumption is that automated vehicles are safer than drivers are.
So we look at a lot of crashes as being due to human error. So people not seeing that someone's making a left-hand turn in front of them, or being able to stop the car soon enough, or notice soon enough, or not noticing that there's somebody in your blind spot, misjudging a distance in a parking lot. So what we think is that autonomous vehicles will be able to correct for all that kind of behavior, that there'll be sensors to tell you when there's somebody in your blind spot, it won't move, the car won't move into that lane. Cars will be communicating with each other, so they'll all know where each other is. So we expect that, if that system evolves as it is expected to, or as people have thought about it evolving, it will be a much safer system. Cars will know where other cars are, they're going to communicate with each other. So if a car 8 cars ahead of you has to brake suddenly, that car is communicating to all the cars behind it, I'm stopping because there's been an accident or a tree is falling down and it's blocking the road, so be prepared to stop so cars behind it are slowing in advance. I think that's right. Environmental conditions are going to be a problem. The argument is that, again, in the ideal world, these cars are going to be able to communicate with the environment and the road surface itself. So the cars are going to know, okay, there's a problem here. And so maybe that first car is not going to avoid the crash, but instead of having 12 cars piled up behind it, you have 2. So it's going to at least perhaps reduce the impact of crashes. And for things like blind spot or people turning in front, making left-hand turn and so forth, a lot of that is expected to be much more regulated and traffic flow to be much more efficient with autonomous vehicles.
This self-drive car, if something went wrong, it is another one system backup. This can fix this. And another question, if the car breaks down on the road, is built up already the system that will come and help the car remove or fix or that will come the training?
Yeah, that's a really good question, is what happens when the cars break or they break down by the side of the road, and we don't know the answers to that yet. And some of that might depend on what kind of ownership model. There's also talk about maybe 10 years, 15 years from now, we're not going to own cars. Why do you need a car? When you need one, you just call one up on your phone and it shows up at your door, but why should you pay to have it parked and sit around in a garage if you're not using it for most of the time? So it might be that it's not the same, absolutely. Right. So I think, we don't know exactly. And maybe it's AAA that you call and it's sort of the same kind of model for repair, or they send a car out to you and you just hop in that instead. You don't even worry about that other car.
My question is, do they want to see if they are planning already back up something that is going wrong?
Certainly, manufacturers are thinking about what happens when the technology fails. Again, there's a huge liability question, so especially, the first time that the car doesn't work when you expect it to, or, are people going to turn away from the technology and decide, I don't want to bother with this, or, somebody puts out a model that's notoriously unreliable, is it going to be something that kind of turns the path and sets the technology back another 5 years, 10 years? I don't know. I think it's a wait and see kind of situation. Yeah, I mean the technology is coming to market though. That's obvious.
Thank you. I was wondering, who funds most of your studies? Is it mainly corporate, or do you have government grants, or do you work with consumer affairs? I was just wondering about your long term.
Most of our research is corporate funded. We do have one grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation, but by and large, our work is funded by different corporate sponsors.
Getting a workout today.
So, I was interested in what you were saying. So you're implying that there's a standard that exists that manufacturers are using currently for cars to be able to talk to each other? Is that correct? Is there a universal standard? So wouldn't that be a major obstacle?
Yeah. It is a
She asked about the technology for cars talking to each other.
It is a big issue, and actually NHTSA just put out last fall a call for manufacturers to kind of start thinking about this space and putting forth ideas about how they want to move into this space. We're not going to see some sort of communication structure imposed top-down, is my sense, that we're not going to see the federal government come in and say everybody's going to be using such and such a standard.
So it's not like the internet?
No.
This is how you talk on the internet?
Not yet. It could be that, we haven't, that notion that cars are going to talk to each other, talk to the environment, talk to the signposts around them has been around for years and years. I think what has changed is the development of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth technologies over that time. So we used to think, oh, we're going to have to wire, hundreds of miles of fiber optics and stuff. It's like, oh, you just need a little sensor now. You just drop the sensor in, and as long as that's working, that's fine. So the different kinds of technologies are changing how we think about how the communication is going to take place. I have not seen anything for standards being set yet, but that is one of the questions about, if Fords only talk to other Fords, that's not going to really be all that helpful or make everything all that much safer. So how are we going to have vehicles talk to one another?
Is there an organization? Is there an organization that's building standards or that manufacturers?
Certainly the industry itself is, I'm sure, engaged in conversations around standards. This is a little far afield from the work that I do, but I can't imagine that they're not having conversations around technology standards, at least for communication with each other. And at some point, I would expect that the federal government and National Highway Transportation Safety Administration is going to set some standards for how vehicles will communicate with each other. Especially if we're going, and if we think about, different states, we're going to need some sort of federal standard that's going to work across state lines and the like. But, again, you may see a state like California step up and impose standards prior to the federal government doing something like that. So you might see a state kind of step ahead and then other people fall in line behind it. So yeah, standard setting is important, but I'm sure that there is work going on around that, but I have not heard a great deal about it.
It seems when you watch TV every day that there are so many crashes of things going into people's homes, into shops, and the excuse seems to be, oh, I stepped on the gas instead of the brake. There's some technologies that could help it. It seems so common.
Yes, absolutely. Things like crash mitigation systems, if they the car senses that there's something, 2 feet in front of you, if you step on the accelerator, it might not let you accelerate, or it might, accelerate at like a mile an hour and stop you. So there are definitely those kinds of technologies that have the potential to limit and mitigate those kinds of accidents. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to take it back to this decade for a minute because I've noticed in automobiles, headlights are different. If you're in a low riding car like a Honda, Civic or something, or compared to an SUV, the headlights are so much better. There doesn't seem to be a standard on headlight the power, because I can see better in sitting in a certain automobile than others. So why is that so uneven?
I don't know exactly why. I would think that probably for some manufacturers there might be cost differences. So some headlights you're going to pay more for if they, for example, track where you go, or they're higher power beams, or some that automatically dim or brighten. So smarter headlights might cost more. Yeah. Yeah. That I don't know. Sorry.
Been driving for quite a while now for visual and vestibular reasons. But I'm noticing something else, and I don't know if TRIPPS is involved with this, or certainly if the Age Lab is interested in this. And that is, we were just talking about the number of scooters, people, bicycles sometimes, other people, posts, signs, problems with lights, crossing, pets. So are you working on bringing this beyond the vehicle to bringing it into a community or any highways where there are lights people have to cross? We still have that horrible rule that you can take a turn on red, and they don't care if there's a crosswalk there. We have not pulled back that rule, which means that it's not always safe, even with the lights, to cross. And I believe it was in this month's issue of AARP magazine that said, I think it said, unless I imagined it, that most elderly people are having problems with being hit in traffic and walking more so than in cars. So is MIT doing any work beyond this in terms of the spaces and the streets and the highways and the lights and all of this?
So technology for pedestrians, keep pedestrians safe.
We at the Age Lab are not, but I know that there are other people in the Urban Studies Department, for example, who are looking at those kinds of questions about design of spaces and streetscapes to make them user-friendly, more usable by a range of people.
Just a couple of brief comments. With miniaturization happening so rapidly, it would be surprising they can have a sensor that a person who wants to could carry on their belt or in their pocket that would communicate with the car when such technology takes place. Another brief comment is I certainly hope that they don't prevent the driver from interceding and taking it over from the automated pilot. And also there was a question earlier about standards for headlights. There are some people high up in government who believe that for every regulation that's put in, we need to remove 2 others. So that is sort of a barrier to getting standards for headlights and other things. I would like to end, then I have a question, which is the end of my comment, which is when you have cars communicating to each other, there's a question of privacy. And I think even more important or more dangerous is someone intercepting, creating false signals. So one car is saying, oh, it's free ahead. In fact, there's a big roadblock. And clearly, you can imagine people who want to create havoc taking advantage of this, and unless there's some way to turn it off, and probably turn it off incrementally rather than totally end the system's function, that seems to be very important given what's happening in the world.
Yes, I would echo that. People are very concerned about autonomous vehicles being hacked. Manufacturers are certainly concerned about that possibility and thinking about what kinds of protections they can put in place to prevent that. But that's one of those situations that it's not resolved. And the question that you raised around privacy and security of these data, if your car is sharing information, or even if you're just calling up a car, if you're using a smartphone, there are data that are being collected about where you're going and what your trip is. There are questions about who owns those data, who gets to use those data, and how do they get to use those data. So there are a lot of questions around these technologies that haven't been answered, and there aren't necessarily regulations designed. So right now, companies might be doing what they want with it, or reselling data, or reselling your information, trying to figure out how to monetize it, so there are big questions around privacy and security, absolutely, that we don't have resolved yet. And they exist not just in the driving and transportation space, but also when we think about home technologies and smart home technologies, which again have the potential to really make living at home more comfortable, safer, more convenient. But again, if there are data being collected, what data are being collected, who are they being shared with, who owns those data, who has rights to those data, there's still all kinds of questions around that are not answered. Maybe that you had a question before.
There's been a lot of news now about people who live in urban areas sharing responsibility of ownership of a car, which would lead me to believe that communal ownership of an autonomous vehicle might be quite a liberating factor for seniors who are relying on things like the ride, not that I want to denigrate it, but at times it's not very convenient, using the T and so forth. If there was communal ownership of an autonomous car whereby a
autonomous car would pick it up and deliver it to wherever it wants to go. It also would be a boomer for people who need to find other means of commuting to work, because a car goes down a certain route to work, and if you had an app and you had the car just stop to pick you up, that would be great. I don't know how you would resolve the issue of ownership and liability and that sort of thing, but I mean, you can sort of put yourself into outer space and think of all these communal ownerships, and I think it would be a good option.
Yeah. Right, there's definitely some money to be made here somewhere for thinking about new ways of owning vehicles and new models for owning vehicles and getting around.
No, I just wanted to make a comment. That's a great idea. That could probably be done with corporations like Zipcar. They could provide that. They could provide that integration. You know, instead of going and getting a Zipcar, you order that would be a person. That's interesting.
Maybe something similar, membership. Yeah. Any other questions? Marilyn had a question about the exercise videos that you showed earlier, where they are, how she can access them.
They are online. They are accessible through the Hartford website. I don't know, Terry, would it be helpful if I sent you links for these things for people?
Yeah, we can put it on our website, the one on your program. Yeah. We'll put an article on there kind of summarizing this and including.
Yeah. I think if you also do a Google search for the Hartford MIT H-Lab driving exercises, you should hopefully come across the videos that way as well, because they are online, they are publicly available. And if you go to the Hartford, I think they're now called the Center for Mature Market Excellence. That just rolls off the tongue. But the Center for Mature Market Excellence, they have a website where all of these resources, a lot of the research that we've done with them, you can access the educational materials, videos, some of our research reports, so you can access all of that.
Yeah, we're about to mention that. So we'd like to thank Dr. Ambrosio for coming tonight, giving us her evening, and sharing how much she does every day. Very generous for her.
Thank you for your patience with the videos as well. I appreciate it.
We'll get that right someday. I can't ever embed a video in a PowerPoint. So yes, please, the feedback forms that were in your chair when you left, please drop those at the table back there where Maria's standing. We have a stack of them to drop those. Thank you for coming. Sign up to stay in touch. We would love to have your email address so I could send out, for example, the Hartford link. Grab some food on the way out. We have plenty of food. And if you see someone at the name tag, they're a TRIPPS volunteer, and if you have any questions, they can probably answer your questions. So thank you very much for coming. This was lovely. We had some great questions from you guys. Thanks a lot.